Today, in terms of housing affordability, Tokyo stands out among big global cities such as New York, London, and Shanghai. Despite its size and population, it has the distinction of being one of the remaining big cities with moderately priced homes. This stands in stark contrast to the growing housing costs and affordability concerns that haunt many cities around the world.
After cooling off for much of the past year, home prices are now matching the mercury this summer. In June, prices nationally hit the second highest on record. This even as mortgage rates heated as well.
7% mortgage rates are now the new normal, and people are accepting it.
Prices now are up over 2% from a year ago, according to Redfin, the biggest increase since December and the second straight gain after nearly 5 months of declines.
Usually when rates go up, housing prices go down, but this time both are up. It's dropped affordability to an all-time low.
Tokyo's extraordinary housing affordability is largely due to a distinctive Japanese approach to urban development. Unlike many Western cities that are dealing with a housing shortage, Tokyo actively prioritizes the development of a large amount of housing. This dedication to continuous development distinguishes it from cities struggling to overcome housing shortages through empty promises and ineffective measures. So, in today's video, let's dive into the Japanese urban planning and how it solved the housing problem. It is vital to emphasize that, contrary to popular belief, Tokyo's housing affordability is not primarily due to a dwindling population. In fact, the population of Tokyo has been constantly expanding. Tokyo's success is built on the convergence of several forces rather than depending on population fall to stabilize housing costs. Flexible zoning rules, effective land use practices, and a distinct cultural viewpoint on real estate, which regards it as a consumable asset with a relatively short lifespan, are among these aspects. This confluence of elements leads to Tokyo's standing as a major city where inexpensive housing is still available despite population expansion. Because of a unique mix of elements that determine how cities are constructed and developed, Japanese urban planning differs from that of many other countries. Japan's high inheritance tax, which has far-reaching ramifications for the real estate industry, is one critical element. Owning a home as a long-term investment becomes less enticing with this high tax rate. As a result, Japanese dwellings are designed to have a shorter lifespan, often around 30 years. This viewpoint contrasts with that of many Western countries, where real estate is frequently regarded as a long-term, appreciating asset. Furthermore, due to Japan's earthquake proneness, structures must be designed with flexibility and adaptability in mind. Because of the ongoing risk of seismic activity, there is a culture of rebuilding and redevelopment, and structures are frequently demolished and replaced, contributing to a continuous cycle of urban renewal. These characteristics collectively produce a dynamic urban landscape in Japan, where cities are always changing, and this approach to growth distinguishes Japan from many other countries. Japanese zoning rules are another distinguishing feature of the country's urban planning. They promote the development of mixed-use zones inside metropolitan regions, allowing a varied range of residential and commercial establishments to coexist in close proximity. Because multiple types of buildings, differing in shape, height, and scale, can be built in close proximity to each other, zoning flexibility allows for a more efficient use of space. This contrasts with many Western cities, where zoning regulations can be more stringent, dividing residential and commercial zones and imposing height and density restrictions. The Japanese method to zoning allows for more intense land use, making greater use of existing space and more successfully meeting demand for housing and business premises. This elasticity in zoning restrictions is critical to Tokyo's ability to provide inexpensive housing while supporting its rising population and ever-changing urban environment. One distinguishing element of Tokyo's urban planning is the lack of strong opposition to growth known as NIMBYism, not in my backyard, which is common in many Western cities.
Haramio says the cries of NIMBY, not in my backyard, finally won out.
People don't want the traffic, the homeless traffic in the downtown area. And I understand that, but there has to be a place for us to be able to serve.
Putting restrictions on the free market for housing and land use makes it harder and more expensive for people to live where they want and inflates the prices of goods and services. These policies are anti-poor and anti-immigrant, or we could say anti the very groups that NIMBYs and affordable housing activists claim to support. Ultimately, any plan to make housing more affordable is self-defeating if it calls for increased governmental authority, because in doing so, it disrupts market forces that constantly and naturally work to bring prices down.
This omission is due to a fundamental difference in the power structure that governs urban development. Local governments in Tokyo and much of Japan do not have the same authority to unilaterally prohibit or restrict development as they have in many Western cities. Local governments in the West are frequently entrusted with decision-making power for development projects, and they are predisposed to respond to the interests of their citizens, resulting to opposition to new construction in many neighborhoods. However, in Japan, these decisions are determined at the national and regional levels, with little influence from local individuals. This transfer in decision-making to a higher authority with a broader view on urban development enables more development-friendly policies to be implemented. It avoids the problem of NIMBYism by prioritizing the general housing demands of the rising population over the specific interests of local individuals. As a result, Tokyo can efficiently encourage more housing building to meet demand without the substantial opposition that Western cities frequently face. In Japan, the centralization of development decisions adds greatly to the city's more development-friendly policies and, as a result, its capacity for housing construction. The power to decide where and how to develop is held at a national and regional level in Tokyo and many Japanese cities, rather than being primarily decentralized to local governments. This centralized decision-making process enables authorities to take a more holistic approach to urban development, taking into account the population's overall housing demands. This centralized strategy reduces the impact of local interests, which could otherwise stymie development efforts. As a result, Japan can establish laws that encourage expanded home building in order to meet the rising demand. This is in contrast to many Western cities, where local governments frequently oppose or delay development projects due to severe NIMBYism fueled by homeowners' concerns about property values, neighborhood character, and infrastructure pressure. The centralization of development choices in Tokyo ensures that the city can address its housing needs proactively without being stymied by local opposition, allowing a more development-friendly climate. While Tokyo's housing model is not totally transferable to other cities, it does provide useful concepts that might be implemented in a variety of urban centers around the world. One such principle is flexible zoning, which is an important part of Tokyo's urban planning. Flexible zoning permits mixed-use development, allowing various types of dwelling and commercial properties to coexist in the same neighborhoods. This technique promotes efficient land use and can more efficiently satisfy the growing need for homes. While the precise execution of Tokyo's zoning restrictions may not be appropriate for every city's unique circumstances, the wider notion of flexibility and adaptability in urban planning might serve as a model for other cities seeking to address housing difficulties. Real estate is often viewed as a long-term investment and a substantial asset in many Western countries. Homeownership is frequently associated with wealth creation, and property values are expected to rise over time. This point of view fosters a culture in which inhabitants are protective of property values and neighborhood aesthetics, often leading to opposition to changes in zoning or development. In contrast, the Tokyo model regards real estate as a consumable asset, with shorter construction lifespans and a distinct approach to property ownership. This shift in perspective allows for greater adaptability in urban design and a greater willingness to meet the ever-changing needs of an expanding population. Cities in Western countries may need to re-examine their cultural and economic attitudes on real estate in order to adopt Tokyo's ideas, recognizing that the aims of affordability and sustainable housing may necessitate a shift in mindset. To summarize, Tokyo's housing model is a viable strategy to addressing housing difficulties. However, Implementing comparable tactics in other cities around the world is a difficult undertaking. Success is determined by how well these ideals mesh with the cultures of each city and its inhabitants. Often, adaptation entails a gradual shift in views and expectations. Nonetheless, the discussion about Tokyo's model fosters broader thought about urban planning and housing solutions, which has the potential to inspire innovative methods in cities around the world.